Imagine walking into one of the oldest museums in the world. You pass ancient swords, priceless jade, and magnificent bronze vessels. Then something stops you, a face. Two enormous eyes stare back at you. A mouth stretches impossibly wide. There is no smile, no anger, no fear, only an endless hunger. It doesn't look human. It doesn't look like any animal you've ever seen. And somehow it feels like it's watching you. This face appears again and again on some of the most important bronze vessels ever created in ancient China. For more than 3,000 years, it has silently watched kings perform rituals, priests offer sacrifices, and generations of people wonder the same thing. What is it? More importantly, why did an entire civilization choose this face to decorate its most sacred objects? The answer is stranger than most people imagine. Today, many call this creature Taotie, one of the most famous monsters in Chinese mythology, a beast consumed by endless hunger, a creature that could never be satisfied. But that wasn't how the story began. In fact, if you traveled back to the earliest days of ancient China and asked someone to describe Taotie, they probably couldn't. Because the monster we know today wasn't created all at once. It was born slowly, across centuries, across dynasties, across countless generations of storytellers. Its legend grew piece by piece, just like the bronze masks that carried its face. Some believed it was a guardian, others believed it was a warning, some saw a god, others saw a demon. No one agreed on exactly what it was, yet everyone remembered its face. That alone makes Taotie different from almost every other mythical creature. Most monsters are remembered because of what they did. Taotie is remembered because of what it represents. Long before psychologists tried to explain human desire, long before economists studied greed, long before philosophers debated happiness, ancient China carved a question into bronze. Can anything ever truly satisfy us? Perhaps that is why the face has no body, no beginning, no end, only eyes that never blink and a mouth that never closes. Because hunger doesn't always belong to monsters. Sometimes it belongs to us. For centuries, people searched for the creature behind that mysterious face. Surprisingly, the oldest Chinese texts never give us a simple answer. If you open the Classic of Mountains and Seas, one of China's oldest collections of myths, you won't find the familiar Taotie described the way most people imagine it today. Instead, you'll discover strange creatures scattered across distant mountains and forgotten lands. Among them is a beast known as Paoxiao. It has the body of a sheep, the face of a man, eyes beneath its arms, tiger-like teeth, human hands, and a cry that sounds like a crying infant. According to the ancient text, it devours people. It is terrifying. But here's the mystery. The book never clearly says this creature is Taotie. That connection came much later. As centuries passed, stories merged together, legends borrowed from one another, artists carved new details, storytellers filled in the silence left behind by ancient texts. Slowly, almost without anyone noticing, different monsters became one, and that single face remained. By the time of the Shang and Zhou dynasties, the image had become impossible to ignore. Bronze vessels were no longer decorated with flowers or simple patterns. Instead, they carried enormous staring eyes, curved horns, sharp fangs, a mouth that seemed far too large for any living creature. Even today, archaeologists still debate what these faces truly meant. Some believe they represented divine protection. Others think they frightened away evil spirits. Some argue they reflected religious rituals. Others believe they warned people about uncontrolled desire. There is no single answer. Perhaps that uncertainty is exactly why the image has survived for more than 3,000 years. Because every generation sees something different in its face. A king might have seen power, a priest might have seen the gods, a warrior might have seen fear. But an ordinary person might have seen themselves. Unlike dragons, Taotie was never remembered for heroic battles. Unlike phoenixes, it never symbolized rebirth. Unlike tigers, it was never admired for strength. Its legend survived for a completely different reason. It forced people to ask a question they could never fully answer. What happens when wanting more never comes to an end? That question is just as difficult today as it was 3,000 years ago, perhaps even more so, because the world around us has changed beyond recognition. But human desire hasn't changed at all. The Monster That Could Never Be Satisfied 11 Labs Edition. Part 3. Over time, the stories became darker. People no longer saw Taotie as just a mysterious face carved into bronze. They began imagining a creature driven by a hunger that could never be satisfied. It consumed everything it found: animals, forests, fields, anything that stood before it. Yet no matter how much it devoured, its hunger never faded. Generation after generation, the legend grew. Some later stories even claimed that Taotie became so desperate that after consuming everything around it, it turned on itself. It devoured its own body until nothing remained except its enormous mouth. Whether that story is historically true doesn't really matter, because legends are not always trying to describe the past. Sometimes they're trying to describe us. Think about it. How many times have you believed that one more achievement would finally make you happy? One more promotion, one more purchase, one more success, one more follower, one more victory. For a moment, it feels enough. Then something changes. The excitement fades. A new goal appears. And the chase begins again. Modern psychology has a name for this. It's called the hedonic treadmill. The idea that people quickly adapt to what they achieve, only to begin wanting something more. 3,000 years ago, ancient China had no psychologists, no brain scans, no behavioral science. Yet somehow they imagined a creature that perfectly captured the same idea, a mouth that could never be filled. Perhaps that is why Taotie's face became more powerful than its story. Because you don't need to understand Chinese mythology to recognize hunger. You felt it before. Not the hunger for food, the hunger for more. More success, more recognition, more security, more time, more life. Desire itself is not the enemy. Without desire, humanity would never have explored the oceans, built civilizations, or reached for the stars. The real danger begins when desire quietly stops serving us, and we begin serving it. That is the moment the legend changes. Because Taotie is no longer a monster living in the mountains. It becomes a shadow following every human ambition. And the frightening part is this: most people never notice when that transformation begins. Because Taotie never forces anyone to become greedy. It doesn't whisper promises. It doesn't make demands. It simply waits, patiently, silently, until one day enough quietly becomes just a little more. One more deal, one more victory, one more year, one more chance. And without realizing it, the finish line moves farther away. Not because the world changed, because we did. Perhaps that is why ancient China never remembered Taotie for its strength. It wasn't the strongest creature. It wasn't the fastest. It wasn't the most intelligent. Its true power was something far more dangerous. It could never be satisfied. And anyone who followed the same path risked becoming exactly like it. That is why the legend survived, not because people feared monsters, but because they recognized themselves inside one. Perhaps every civilization creates the monsters it needs. Some fear chaos, some fear darkness. Ancient China feared something else. The moment when desire stops being a tool and quietly becomes our master. That is the moment a human heart begins to resemble the face carved into bronze thousands of years ago. Not because it wants food, but because it no longer remembers what it means to have enough. And once that happens, the hunger is no longer outside us. It has already become part of who we are. The Monster That Could Never Be Satisfied 11 Labs Edition. Part 4. Perhaps that is why Taotie has survived for more than 3,000 years. Not because it was the largest monster, not because it was the most terrifying, but because every generation eventually discovers the same truth. There is always something more to want. Ancient kingdoms chased power, merchants chased wealth, scholars chased knowledge, warriors chased glory. The objects changed. The hunger never did. Today the world looks very different. We no longer carve mysterious faces into bronze. We carry smartphones instead of ritual vessels. We build skyscrapers instead of ancient palaces. But the question Taotie asks has never changed. How much is enough? One more promotion. One more house. One more million. One more award. One more person telling us we've finally made it. For a moment, each new achievement feels like the answer. Then the feeling fades. The hunger returns. And the chase begins again. Perhaps this is why the ancient craftsmen gave Taotie such enormous eyes. Eyes that never seem to blink. Eyes that are always searching. And a mouth that never closes. Because desire rarely announces itself as something dangerous. It usually arrives disguised as ambition, as opportunity, as success, as the belief that happiness is waiting just beyond the next achievement. Sometimes it is, often it isn't. The tragedy of Taotie was never that it wanted too much. The tragedy was that nothing was ever enough. Perhaps that is the difference between ambition and greed. Ambition helps us build the future. Greed convinces us the present will never be enough. The ancient Chinese never left us a single explanation for Taotie. Instead, they left us a face. A face that has stared back at humanity for more than 3,000 years. Perhaps they understood something that still feels true today. The most dangerous monsters are not always the ones hiding in forests. Sometimes they live inside ordinary people. Sometimes they wear our face. Perhaps Taotie was never meant to frighten us. Perhaps it was meant to remind us. To stop. To look at our own reflection. And to ask one simple question. When does enough finally become enough? Because if we never ask that question, we may spend our entire lives feeding a monster we cannot see. And by the time we finally recognize its face, it may already be our own.